probably do soft spoken just so you can hear me a little bit better whilst I'm reading. So, if you like me, grab a warm drink. I've got a lovely cup of tea here that I will be drinking throughout. And I've also got a nice warm blanket to keep me comfy. I'll just lay that down nice and warm. So soft. So soft. So, I will be reading the story on my iPad, and I will be reading it off of Kindle. I have chosen a story that is around 8 pages long. So after we read it, you can go straight to sleep if you can. Now, this story is called The Midnight Crew, and I'll just have a sip of my drink. We shall begin. So this is The Midnight Crew by Andrew Carlin. It's just described as a scarily short, scary story. Okay. Attention Shady Grove Safe Plus shoppers, the time is now 9:55 and your Safe Plus store will be closing in 5 minutes. Thank you. The overhead announcement echoed throughout the department store. Most shoppers seemed to take notice and began walking towards the registers with their purchases. That is, most shoppers, except 2 boys who were glued to the game station video display in the electronics department. Wow, this is definitely what I want for Christmas this year, exclaimed the boy who was playing the game station display. He was wearing a brightly coloured snow jacket and had a red beanie stretched over the top of his enormous head. Time Sphere 2 is awesome. It's pretty cool, I guess, said the other boy, who was looking over his chubby friend's shoulders, watching him play Time Sphere 2. Unlike his buddy, he wore an older and much more faded snow coat, and his brown beanie had a quarter-sized hole where some of his hair poked through. Pretty cool? The first boy turned and asked in disbelief. Gale, Time Sphere 2 is the single greatest game of our generation. Okay, Steve, Gale said in defence. You don't need to freak out. Steve turned his oversized head back to the game station screen and continued playing. It wasn't as though Gale didn't like video games, but after hearing Steve go on and on about it for the past 3 months, he was a little tired of hearing about it. Besides, he didn't even know if Time Sphere 2 was any fun anyway. Steve had been playing it the whole time. Steve, we gotta get going, Gale said, tugging Steve's coat. The store's closing. Hang on just a sec, Steve mumbled like a zombie. Almost done. Steve, Gale said nervously, grabbing Steve by his sausage-like arm. Steve! Hold on, dude. Steve, look, Gale pleaded, yanking on Steve's arm. What? Steve shouted as he turned around. He snarled at Gail for a full 5 seconds before he understood what he was trying to tell him. The store was dark and empty. A few lone lights overhead flickered every couple of seconds, but the building was quiet and as empty as a cemetery, next to a library, next to an ear trauma ward. "Hello? Anybody there?" Steve called out. No answer. Running through the dimly lit store at full speed, the boys reached out to the front doors and desperately yanked on them. Locked. "Pull!" Steve shouted, his large face turned redder than a ripe tomato. "It's no use," Gail sighed. "We're locked in." "There's got to be another way out of here," Steve said, pulling at his phone. He called his dad, but quickly got a no-service signal. "No," he screamed, looking at his phone. "No bars and the Wi-Fi is down." "How are we going to get out of here?" Gail started to have a panic attack. "You know, if your parents got you a phone, maybe..." Thud, crash, bang. What was that? Gail shrieked, clutching Steve's arm. "Take it easy," Steve snapped, prying Gail's hand off him. "It's just a building creaking." "Look," Gail exclaimed, pointing at the telephone at the top of the cash registers. "A phone." Running over, Steve snagged the phone and put it to his ear. "Dead," he muttered. "Of course it's dead." "We're in so much trouble," Gail whimpered. "We aren't in any trouble yet." Steve remained hopeful. "Maybe we can find an emergency exit somewhere." As they moved their way through the darkened store, Gail stuck to Steve like glue. They rounded a corner and started to walk down the main aisle. On their right was a toy department, and to their left, a book and magazines. Gail was trembling and shaking like a plate of jelly during an earthquake, and although Steve looked calm, his heartbeats were getting louder and louder and faster and faster. Reaching the end of the main aisle, which was near the sporting goods section, the boys came to a stop. "Do you see anything?" Steve whispered. No, whimpered Gail. "I don't see anything." Clang, bang, thud. Before you could say, "What was that?" the boys bolted towards the sporting goods section and hid. "What was that?" Gail said, from behind a large bin filled with basketballs. "I don't know," Steve answered, wide-eyed. "Maybe it was just a building creaking." "That wasn't the building creaking," Gail spat. "Creaking buildings don't go bang." "Good point," said Steve, looking back towards Gail from behind the weight bench. "What do you think?" Bang! The boys froze. Their eyes were as wide and as white as dinner plates. Gail put his hand over his mouth to quiet his raspy breath. Steve's heart was beating so fast and so loud that he was sure that whoever or whatever was making that noise could hear it. After a few quiet moments passed, Steve shakily inched his head from behind the weight bench. He was hiding behind and peered over the top of it, and immediately shot back down again. "There's someone there," he whispered, in horror, looking over at Gail, whose eyes somehow managed to get even bigger than before. Trembling, Steve carefully spied over the top of the weight bench again. He could clearly see what looked like a man standing with his back to them, maybe 30 feet away. Steve was about to crouch back down and suggest to Gail that they sneak away when something caught their eye. "Hey," Steve started, sounding confused. "I think that person works here." "What?" Gail stuttered. Yeah, it looks like he's wearing a blue polo shirt, Steve continued, pointing at the man. Steve had been in enough Safe Plus stores to recognise their company blue-coloured polo shirts. Slowly making his way out from behind the basketball bin, Gail saw the man too. Hey, yeah, I think you're right. With a little more confidence and a little bit of relief, the boys started quickly and quietly walking towards the man in the blue shirt. The closer they got, however, something didn't seem quite right. Excuse me, Steve said, though it came out much more softly than he had planned. The man didn't move. Steve cleared his throat. Excuse me, sir? Nothing. Reaching out to tap the man on the shoulder, Steve started to repeat himself. Excuse me. But all he was able to get was the "m" out of me. Because as his hand was about to make a connection with the man's shoulder, it passed straight through it. Mouths wide open, Steve and Gail gawked at the man in the blue as they slowly realised he was completely see-through. The boys screamed in unison. The see-through man turned around. He looked like he was in his mid-40s with shaggy hair and thick glasses. His clothes and skin glowed blue and looked like a slowly moving fog. He seemed surprised to see the two boys staring at him, screaming their heads off. Ghost! Steve bellowed, pulling out his hand back sharply. Run for it. The boys took off running in the opposite direction. Barreling past the sporting goods section, they quickly turned left and ran down the main aisle at lightning speed. Wait! The see-through man called out after them. But by that point, Steve and Gail were halfway across the department store. We've got to get out of here, Gail sputtered as they ran towards the women's clothing department. But we're locked in, Steve shouted. We need to find a place to hide. Without taking another second to think, he grabbed Gail by his bony arm and pulled him into the rack filled with women's dresses. The rack was in a circular shape, with just enough space in the centre for one large and one skinny boy to hide. We've got to be so quiet, Steve whispered, holding a finger up to his lips. Gail covered his mouth with his hands and nodded in agreement. The boys sat in silence for what seemed to be like an hour. The only sound they could hear were their own hearts pounding like drums. Steve slowly parted two dresses with his hands and peered through. See anything? Gail whispered. No, nothing. Wait! Steve jumped up in surprise. I can see a door with an exit sign. Maybe we can get through that. Gail moved closer to get a look at the door and then nervously added, Okay, let's make a run for it. The boys snuck from their hiding spot and crept towards the door, looking every which way to make sure the see-through man was nowhere to be seen or seen through. Steve grabbed Gail by the arm of his well-worn jacket. Almost there. Gail was so focused on making sure his steps were quiet as could be that he didn't notice that his legs begun to shake and he started to lose balance. Steve! He shrieked, falling onto Steve's back. Come on, Steve said, pushing Gail back onto his feet. We're almost there. The door was only 10 feet away now. Steve reached out his chubby arm as they crept closer. His hand was almost at the door handle when... What are you doing here? Steve and Gail spun around like tops. Their eyes bulged out of their sockets. Their mouths hung in terror as they saw not one, but an entire crowd of see-through people staring back at them. The ghost closest to them, the one that had asked them the question, was an old lady who, like the man earlier, looked like a blue wisp of fog. She had a name tag printed onto her shirt, which read, Nancy. She had her ghost hair tied up into a tight bun, and she was staring daggers at the boys. I said, Nancy, the ghost repeated herself. What are you doing here? We're closed. Still frozen like a popsicle, Stephen attempted to reply. Each word was very, very difficult to get out. We're locked in, and we're trying to get out. Well, I can assure you that you're not going anywhere anytime soon. Nancy the ghost cackled. She turned to the army of ghosts behind her, who all burst into laughter. Exchanging terrified and confused glances with each other, Steve and Gail began slowly inching towards the exit door behind them. It's locked, the see-through man from earlier said between laughs. What? Steve asked. Who are you guys? We, Nancy the ghost answered, are the Midnight Crew. The Midnight Crew? Steve repeated. But you're all ghosts, right? Gail trembled. Of course we're all ghosts, Nancy the ghost mocked, stuttering like Gail with a ghoulish grin. The managers here didn't like us very much, so they fired us and erased our employee records. She continued. Without employee records, we don't exist anymore. We're very sorry to hear that, Gail sputtered. Shut up, the see-through man snapped, adjusting his glasses. You can't work on the Midnight Crew unless you're a ghost. You can't be a ghost in here unless you're on the Midnight Crew. Don't you stupid kids get it? With their backs pressed up against the exit door, Steve gave it a push, and just like Nancy the ghost had said, it was locked tight. What are you going to do to us? Gail whimpered. What did we just tell you? Nancy the ghost scolded. You can't be in the store when it's closed unless you're on the Midnight Crew, and you can't be on the Midnight Crew unless you're a ghost. The ghost crowd burst into laughter once again. What? Steve asked in disbelief, looking down at his hands. His eyes widened and his heart began pounding like crazy. He could see the black and white tile floor straight through his hands. Glancing back up, he looked at Gail in horror. Just like Steve, Gail was watching as his hands slowly disappeared into a blue, foggy vapour. What's happening to us? Steve cried as he looked back down at his ghostly hands. We're going see-through. Like we said, Nancy the ghost smiled. You can't be in the store after dark unless you're on there. We're ghosts, Gail cried. That's one way to look at it, the see-through man answered. Or look through it, another ghost chimed in, causing yet another roar of laughter from the crowd. The boys exchanged tearful glances, looking into each other's newly see-through ghost faces. Okay, fun time's over, Nancy the ghost motioned for the others to quieten down. We're on the Midnight Crew to work. She handed Steve and Gail 2 see-through mops and buckets without any water in it. You can start by cleaning the bathrooms, she continued with a wicked smile. But I must warn you, someone made a huge mess in there. So, that was the very short story of the Midnight Crew. And I hope you enjoyed and that you can fall asleep if you're not too scared. I think it was more entertaining than scary.